For years, the prevailing message in the financial literacy industry has been that anyone can budget, save, borrow, and invest their way out of financial hardship and even oppression. But that mindset is shifting. This is episode 2 of Silence is Violence: Stories of Financial Education. In this episode, Dr. Michelle Samuels-Jones, Senior Vice President of Equity and Engagement at NEFI, will join me. NEFI is the National Endowment for Financial Education. It is an independent, centralizing voice providing leadership, research, and collaboration to advance financial well-being. It is one of the first organizations to wholly dedicate its efforts to improving the effectiveness of financial education through strengthening action-oriented research agendas, mobilizing intermediaries, and creating better solutions for researchers, educators, practitioners, and policymakers. My conversation with Dr. Samuels-Jones acknowledges the tension and complexity of delivering financial education through a system that is oppressive by design. It also highlights the critical, hopeful work of organizations like NEFI, as well as others that are leading the collective mindset shift we are experiencing and delivering financial education in a way that benefits people who have historically been excluded. I hope you enjoy this episode. I'm very excited today to bring Michelle on board with me to have a conversation. I may have had to convince you, I may have even had to slightly beg you to come out from behind the scenes, but you're here.
I am here just for you, Chloe, just for you. I am here.
What's that tone? Do I sense a little sass?
No, this is me tuning up to give you everything that you desire for our time together.
Well, I'm really excited for our guests to, frankly, just be a fly on the wall of what it's like to be in conversation when Chloe and Michelle are talking about things that matter.
I love that.
If that's what we're going to call today's episode, that's what we're going to do. So let's start off with this. Michelle, could you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure. Again, my name is Michelle Samuels-Jones. I have actually been with NEFI since June of 2023. This time has gone by extraordinarily fast, but I have to say this has been the most life-giving and transformational role that I have held in my career in quite some time. I serve as our Senior Vice President for Equity, and in that space, I am one of the many folks within the organization and across the field who are championing what equitable financial education can look like, particularly when we think about our underrepresented populations, those voices and identities that have consistently remained on the margins. We are saying enough, and how do we center voices throughout every aspect of our work? And so that's what I do, and it makes no sense to identify who I am because what I just told you is who I am.
What's been exciting about my time at NEFI, which has been weirdly longer than yours as a visiting scholar, is just kind of watching the world change. NEFI's Visiting Scholar program's goal is to host individuals who are at the forefront in practice in a specific and underexplored area of financial education. The work of scholars aims to deepen their understanding of the challenges posed by financial distress and pave the way for evidence-based interventions and policies aimed at fostering resilience and well-being. Frankly, I would say a much more exciting way, which is really the point of today's episode, that if we're really grounded in an understanding, which I know that we are, that the reality of delivering financial education is really about accepting, acknowledging, and honoring the fact that it was designed in a time, right? So in episode 1, we talk about the history, it was designed in a time that still left certain people's experiences and certain truths about how the economic systems work absent.
Absolutely.
From how we end up delivering education to folks, and those embedded legacies of oppression, in some ways, I won't say kind of haunt financial education as it may exist today, but I think we're at a wonderful moment where we're starting to move beyond that.
Absolutely.
Can you tell me from your vantage point, my listeners have heard from me what I think equity in financial education means, but what does it mean to you?
Oh, great question to start with. And Chloe, let me just go backwards and just piggyback on something that you said. There are, and this is not any different than any industry we talk about, the way that you started and who you served when you began, there are always remnants, good, bad, or indifferent, that continue and are perpetuated forward. And so that is what we are trying to uncouple and uncover when we do this work in financial education. There are invisible things that we just don't even know what we don't know that we have to get deeper and go deeper about. So I appreciate you acknowledging that, because there are legacies, good, bad, and ugly, that we have to be able to name and see differently to be able to do this work. So when I think about equity in financial education, and these are the conversations I'm having constantly with my colleagues in and outside of NEFI, it is a space, as I think about it, where everyone, and I do mean every single person, across the myriad of identity factors and the intersectionality of their identities, their histories, their context, their environment, all of those things, they have fair and just opportunities to acquire financial information, insights, and knowledge, both knowledge that is visible and invisible, to be able to gain the behaviors and skills and capabilities to thrive. And I do mean thrive generally, not just thrive in one space, but we know that the space of the financial ecosystem and financial education as a part of that is connected to all well-being and your ability to thrive.
You're going to hear the term financial ecosystem multiple times throughout this podcast. Financial education is one part of the financial ecosystem. The financial ecosystem underpins an individual's state of well-being and represents a holistic understanding and approach to helping individuals achieve well-being within the broader environment they operate within and engage with. One of the things that I've loved about working with you and NEFI is how we both push each other to think. And I'm so grateful to NEFI for pushing my work and my understanding of things. You know, I came to NEFI after spending years in the financial education space being really frustrated, particularly for the populations that I studied and cared about, i.e. Black women, women of color. I felt like I was encircled with a number of issues with financial education and where I felt as though it was failing people who looked like me. And so I kind of came into developing my own theory on financial trauma, you know, being inspired or influenced by that frustration. But what I've loved about what I've learned from NEFI is how financial education is evolving, right? So that may have been my snapshot in time of how I got into the work. But I have also for myself seen that financial education as an idea and frankly as an action, right? If we almost make it a verb, is moving away from the prevailing message that we are somehow the only or the largest influence over our wealth building capability, but that there are actual other things in the broader ecosystem that influence our socioeconomic experiences. So can you talk to me a little bit about that, of how you've seen financial education evolve and how people are responding to that?
Absolutely. Let me also just say this caveat to how I answered your first question. Thus far in my time at NEFI, I have yet to come across a universally, if you will, air quotes, adopted definition of what equitable financial education means.
Yes.
So just know that I'm contextualizing some of this conversation in that space. Now, let me say, listeners, if such a thing exists, please send that our
Please
way.
let us know.
Please let us know. And not to say that we need the same definition, but in the same way that I am studying and learning from spaces like healthcare and the ed tech fields, there are tenets that folks agree to say when equitable fill in the blank exists, it will look, feel, and respond this way. We have to get to that place in financial education, or how will we know we're really making progress?
Yes.
So there's rich research and all of those things. And I'm going to parlay into your question in just a second, but I do want to underscore, we have to know what we mean in order to really study it, measure it, and be able to see the change, particularly among communities of color, marginalized folk, or else we can say, oh, look at all these great things we did, but are we really transforming lives in that way? So I am so grateful the way that you teed this up. And I would be remiss if we didn't talk about there have been organizations and individuals for decades who have always been identity conscious in their approaches to financial education. In fact, they were the folks that actually started to do FinEd work specifically to serve historically underrepresented or marginalized populations. And so that work from its inception embraced identity and culture and my history and my practice and really said, it makes no sense to start in a place of language and traditions about this content of what financial education means and ignore my story and ignore how I show up and ignore my lived experience. The two things that matter didn't match. And so if you think about even educational pedagogy in its broadest sense, that's what good educational pedagogy does. It doesn't just teach the content or the subject. It says, who are you and how are you situated in the content and the subject matter so it makes sense to you from your lens?
This is so powerful. And it ties directly to a core component of my research, which is the pathologization of financial trauma. In my research and work, I talk about the importance of asking what happened to you instead of what is wrong with you, because it situates the individual and their community and their experiences in their context and validates their experiences.
Interestingly enough, the world I lived in before I came to NEFI was higher education. I spent a lot of time in spaces thinking about student success and student retention and pedagogies and environments to help students thrive. And a lot of those kinds of things were able to translate and transition over into this work that I do. And the ways that I have partnerships with other folks, and it has been powerful to talk about what does it mean to situate the learner in the center of all that we're doing. And education in its broadest, purest, and most powerful and impactful sense being our ability to translate and transfer information from the perspective of the learner, not just from what we think is best practice. And so that's the shift. And that's the space that's really emerging differently. The power in that is the power of who am I? And I'm seeing educators and professionals and financial counselors and all of these different folks who are not starting necessarily with, here's what I want you to know. They are beginning with, who are you? What's your experience? What is it that you believe? And what is it that you want to know? Tell me about you. And then we can figure out what direction we need to go. That's powerful. And if we don't start there, we miss it. We just absolutely fundamentally miss it.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that the way that our work connects so beautifully is in my work around financial trauma, the evolution of my conceptual definition and how I measure and study it really in its newest iteration with the work that I'm doing at NEFI with Josh and Michael, teaser to episode 3, listeners, is the ways in which we see how financial trauma shows up for people or to certain people because we rooted the latest iteration of our definition on financial trauma by building on Maria Root's work on insidious trauma. And insidious trauma to her is about the types of trauma that people will experience simply because of the characteristics that are intrinsic to their identity dictate how they're able to move and participate in certain spaces and contexts. And so I think that that's so important, again, as this episode's really meant to celebrate where financial education is going and getting right to continue to maximize impact and reduce the kind of original harms that weren't addressed. Because I think that if we remove the effort of understanding the people who need to and want to benefit from the education, we're ultimately limiting impact.
Absolutely. So, Chloe, let's break it down to something really practical that I have conversations with folks about all the time. Why would I start to have conversations with individuals about checking and savings accounts and all those kinds of things when they don't have access to a bank? Or when their trust or their experience in banking, because of identity pieces that you're talking about, has been so wrought with stress and trauma. Like, that's just a fundamental disconnect. And so to bring this into how we talk about this in a practical way, it is so important to understand who am I, who are we serving, and what their experiences are, both their own experiences that where they may have choice, but also most critically, the experiences that have been projected onto them just because of how they show up in their own identity. It is so hard to connect those dots if we are not grounded in really being invested in those folks that we're truly serving and what we learn from those different spaces.
Absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head for me too, because I think that that is to your point about maybe coming up with universal definitions, but in our work together, we've used really expansive definitions to describe things. And for me, when we talk about cultural competency, that's one of those things. It's not just about let me learn about you, but let me also demonstrate that I have learned how the system influences you, limits you, harms you, serves you, supports you. And if we don't ultimately take responsibility and doing that part of the work either, how can we even show up and
Yeah.
be able to do the listening that's necessary that you're talking about?
Without question. And I appreciate, and my hope is that the baseline is for folks to be culturally competent. We have to be driving forward folks to be culturally fluent
Mm,
and really being able to do just what you described. Competency to me is the baseline.
yes.
It's the same thing as saying, okay, yes, if you think about what competent and competency means, it means that I have a good grounding in something or what have you, and I'm able to be functional. When we're talking about serving communities to break historical trauma, to break systems, that's a different level beyond competency. That's moving us into an excited space about fluency and beyond. And so you can tell I love this work and I'm excited. Now, I will say I'm grateful for all the folks in the trenches, again, already doing this work, but we have a ways to go.
Mhm.
We have a ways to go. The good news is there are so many more willing partners who are raising their hand to say, I get it. I'm not doing it well, or I'm doing it really well. How do we come together to really shift the landscape and have it look very differently?
Yeah. I mean, I think we've kind of hit on it, but I almost want you to double down, right? Use your educator in you. Why is this shift so important? Because I think culturally, as Americans, we all agree that having this level of financial savvy seems to be just like a part of our collective identity, regardless of how problematic that might ultimately end up being, right? Like if we were at its face, we all kind of collectively agree that having financial knowledge, this base level financial literacy, whatever you want to call it, is important. But the work again that we do is we're kind of unpacking that a little bit because in saying that we want that, that also what we talked about in episode 1 is reinforcing some of those again embedded legacies of oppression of somehow we can budget, borrow, save, and invest our way out of oppression. That if we are hyper focused on individualistic tendencies or choices, then that would mean that we're ultimately subscribing to an idea that our choices alone are the single most important influence on our socioeconomic experiences and outcomes. So can you just help us kind of come full circle about why this shift from a more ecosystems and identity conscious focus of financial education is so important?
I'm going to keep it really simple because it works. So, I mean, seriously, there's a lot that we can philosophize about. We can come at this from a space of altruistic beliefs and say, it's for the good of, and I believe in all that. There is evidence that shows when you center the experience of those you're serving, whatever the content is, whatever the material is, whatever the information is, it holds and is believed and is used and becomes empowering and equipping in a very different way than when you just said, here's what it is, good luck and learn it. And it doesn't connect to how you live, how you think, who you are. We have ample evidence. Look at any field. Look at any, math approaches changed, teaching history changed, and teaching science and chemistry. All those different disciplines evolved to say, yes, there is a central tenet that we must teach, but to do that in the absence of who I'm teaching isn't as powerful and isn't as impactful. So why wouldn't we do the same? We have ample research that demonstrates and models when you connect the learning to the learner and the learner's history and environment, the power and the impact on the outcomes is dramatically changed. So I could offer a lot more, but I'm going to say the shift is important because we have evidence that it works.
Snaps. Like, come on now. Now y'all here, listeners. Come on. Are you with us? Come on now. That is the work being done, like you said, by a number of amazing people in the field, and the work we need to continue to do. But let's also talk about some of the work we need to do to correct some of the harm that's been done because of old ways that, again, I think we all collectively agree could have been better.
Mm-hmm.
So to the work that I do, I talked about, I got into developing my theory on financial trauma, coming from the financial education space, and where an overwhelming narrative that I heard, particularly from Black women and women of color, was their frustration about what financial education, what they learned financial education was not. In some ways, this continues to show up in the research that I'm doing with NIFI, which is that I'm, of course, paraphrasing using my own insight here, but the Black women that I have partnered with in research ended up ultimately saying that financial education was not designed to help me navigate my own financial trauma. And part of that is because it did not connect the learning to the learner and their history and their experiences and the things that are, again, intrinsic to their identities. And so what do we need to do for the populations and communities who ultimately have developed this sense of overwhelming frustration and even, I'll go as far as say, mistrust in financial education? What can we do?
Before we do, this is a theme you're going to hear me continue to say, before we do anything, can we listen? Can we pause long enough to listen? Again, coming from some different spaces and coming from the world of creation of best practices and scholars and folks who think, there is a lot of movement to be able to share what we have learned. And I am all for that. What I hope we will do before we take a single step is listen and ask some questions and pause to hear and understand the experiences. A fundamental question: what happened to you? How did you feel as a result of what happened? Magical question: so what is it that you want and need? What do you need to be able to trust again? I would love, and I have been, thankfully, in those spaces to just sit and listen, because my worry is, Chloe, to this really important conversation that you've raised, is there are many of us that are willing to be different, do different, function differently. There are folks who are inside systems tearing them apart, which is amazing. I and others need to make sure that what we think are the solutions are truly the solutions that those most harmed will benefit from. We may not know. We may not know. As a Black woman myself, I have a different lived experience. So how dare I insert my experience onto the experience of another Black woman and say, oh, this is what I think you would need to be able to trust the financial system or what have you. I think it is imperative upon us to be able to ask those questions, not just, again, about what you need to navigate the financial system, but what does it look like and what's the evidence of trust for you? What would build and facilitate trust? The other piece of this, Chloe, is, again, in my previous life, people used to hear me say, instead of do for, can we do with and do through?
Yes.
I think a huge piece of our next step is to be in partnership to design and develop with those we serve, not just for those we serve. There is so much we will learn and know how to do differently and better when we sit and partner and say, I need your eyes, I need your brilliance to design how we can best serve you. I think fundamentally that's a critical step for us. I just want to go in a slightly different direction with this really important question. This is a moment where I really hope that people hear and understand how history and context and broader learning matters and is so critical. The mistrust of financial institutions, particularly among Black communities, is centuries old.
Yes.
And it's fascinating to me that this is a place where history matters, because no matter how far removed we may think we are from a time or an incident or an experience, the vestiges of that experience, oh my goodness, it's so extraordinary how folks carry those things today. So lately I've been rereading a lot about the Freedmen's Bank. And for folks who don't know, the Freedmen's Savings and Trust Company was established for the formerly enslaved in 1865. And at the height of that bank's success, formerly enslaved folks in this country deposited $57 million at that time, calculations for that time, not today's dollars. And so when you think about folks who were just freed, were able to build wealth to the tune of $57 million at the height of that bank's success, that is extraordinary.
Yeah.
Sadly, traumatically, and I don't even have the words, goodwill met bad, horrific intention and outcome. And the result of the Freedmen's Savings and trust being an interesting word, language matters, that bank, it was fleeced. So the millions and millions and millions of dollars that were overseen by white trustees, by white businessmen, by white members of Congress, by white investors, the shift that happened was that bank went from becoming a savings bank to a commercial bank. And so 95% of those loans on that money went to white investors and white businessmen, and like less than 5% of those loans went to Black folks. And so, sad story, bank folds, all that wealth is gone within 10 years.
Wow.
That did not just happen hundreds of years ago. Those were economic communities that were forevermore disrupted and compromised. Those histories and that legacy carries forward. It was one of the first evidences of financial distrust in the system by marginalized folks. And so I bring this around to say, one, I think it's very important that folks know Black Americans in this case, in the US, understood money more than most.
Exactly.
Folks understood the importance and saw wealth and avenues to build wealth as a pathway to both political and economic freedom. So I say that because this is where education is more than just the content and the subject matter of dollars and cents. Folks knew, and it was interesting because financial education was part of the economic investment that was happening with the Freedmen's Bank. And so folks were getting lessons. That wasn't the issue. The issue was a predatory experience happened and it was a betrayal of trust. And so this is why the broader lens of education is so important. So when folks don't understand history and its impact on present day understanding, and therefore moving first to the space of what happened to you, how does that make you feel? And what is it that you want to have happen? If we don't start there, we continue to miss it and we continue to ignore legacies, both positive and negative, that folks carry every day when they're making any kind of choice or don't have the choice to be able to move forward in this financial ecosystem.
100%. And it reminds me of why it was so important for me to talk to people about the fact that financial trauma, in my conceptual definition, is not a pathology. It is a real experience that people have because something happened to them, not because something was wrong with them. There's something wrong with the system, but
Hmm.
there's nothing fundamentally wrong with people who end up sometimes making financial choices that may not be in their long-term financial best interest. There are no personality defects. In my world, I see them as trauma responses. And to your point, in order to make that shift, we have to understand the history. And I'm so glad that you named that, because I even think from a couple of years ago, oh man, I'm forgetting the HBO show of what it's called, but Regina King, my girl, was in it. The first episode started with the burning of Black Wall Street, and then there was like a massive trending on Twitter because people were like, wait, that really happened? And it's like, yeah.
Hmm.
So some folks, ultimately end up pointing to more contemporary examples of where this mistrust and distrust started. But
Yeah.
no, it's way further back. And it almost, again, kind of happens in a cycle, or there's these more generational moments of massive moments of where these moments of distrust kind of happen. And the other part that I totally agree with you on is when we are thinking about helping to rebuild trust, and again, in my kind of conceptual world of financial trauma, I think about material safety, that it's fundamentally different than talking about financial security, because security, to me, most people, the connotative implication of that is the dollars and cents. I have enough actual money or wealth or assets or whatever to withstand some big occurrence. But for me, material safety is actually qualitatively different, in so much that, do certain people and groups, communities have a sense of assurance that even if
Hmm.
they experienced socioeconomic harm or financial trauma or economic violence, that they'd be able to overcome it in a way that doesn't feel so deleterious, not just to their financial health, but also just to their health in general. That there's kind of this assured protection from the powers that be and how our economic system was structured. And then the final piece that I'll say is, and this is why the teaching says that our communities, the most marginalized folks, are our research partners. They're not our subjects,
Right.
our partners, because they have this kind of embedded or encoded cultural knowledge and memory that we've just not particularly prioritized and given a platform for them to tell us what we need to know. And I agree with you that when we want to rebuild trust, it's actually first and foremost incumbent upon us to say, we trust you to tell us because you know.
Absolutely. Chloe, what you are teeing up just rings through for me as part of our work being around building psychological safety. And so there's the
Mhm.
material safety and all these other pieces in terms of the tangibles of financial security can do for you. And this is, of course, not just for marginalized and underrepresented folks, but particularly there is a hyper focus on me feeling psychologically safe
Yes.
and me feeling that this is not just for my material, for lack of a better term, well-being, but this is for my holistic well-being. We can't segment ourselves in that way, particularly when we're talking about communities of color and really thinking about any group that we're trying to serve. If my educational platform is to advance you, that means all of you. That means holistically you. And so, how do we build paradigms and approaches and frameworks and all the things that help us see the person? And in every single experience that I think about, the learner, there is an individual, there is a face, a name, a family, a history that we are talking about in every single story. I love the stats and I love the numbers, but I also want to know about Michelle and Chloe and Nina and John and Robin and Kevin and whomever else, because the work we're doing is about how you live your life every single day. We can never lose sight of that.
Yes. Well, we could talk about this forever. And again, welcome to the coffee sessions that Michelle and I have after we, I don't know, talk about the weather or something, or our previous careers as runners.
I'm long retired as a runner. long retired, but okay.
But I want to end with this question, and it might be putting you on the spot. I know we kind of prepped for this, but what have been either one, the biggest learning that you've had, or maybe a couple of things that you've learned since entering the financial education space that you think is worth amplifying?
Oh, wow. Ugh, there's so many things. Okay. I want to piggyback on something that I learned from my friend Chloe, from you. One of the most powerful takeaways for me as a person transitioning into this space is the critical need we have to remove shame from this whole conversation and all of our work. I just remember experiencing, I'll use myself as an example, having financial advisors and folks, and just the fear and trepidation I had as a person who has degrees and blah, 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 and has worked professionally for 30 years. My. Just the shame and the fear that I had going into those spaces, and the why don't you understand this, or why don't you, or me feeling like something was wrong with me, or I couldn't get it, or I did these things wrong, and that message, and you've have this kind of history. Why haven't you done blah, 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 blah? The level of shame that I left and still carry, honestly, from a lot of those encounters around finance are daunting. And that has probably been one of the biggest takeaways in terms of how do we create truly judgment-free spaces that see you as you are, not as I wish you to be.
Mm.
I have so learned from my colleagues about this piece to say, Michelle, that's fundamental in terms of how we do our work. When I can create a space that doesn't make you feel bad or make you feel, back to your point, that something is wrong with you, or you made these bad choices because you're a bad person. Oh my word. And that was so visceral for me in terms of transitioning into this space. The other thing I would mention is, I mentioned this before, how language matters.
Yeah.
I have seen the most creative, thoughtful, forward-thinking partners in our space pivot language from the center of the learner and to say, yeah, here's how we use this word budget or check or whatever the technical term might be, into tell me how you use that in your community. What's the word you use? And that's been so powerful. One of my favorite partners, they have transformed all of what I would call financial education vernacular into hip hop pedagogy. Brilliant. I'm like, yes. And so that's how they're reaching the communities that they serve. I have another colleague who just did some very different things artistically and visually around the translation and the decoding of this work. So I've learned that there are technical and tactical ways that are foundational to this work, but the delivery mechanism for how to reach folks and for how, most importantly, for them to reach into us have been transformational. That's been so powerful.
Well, you are powerful, and our love for each other is powerful. And I just greatly appreciate you spending time with me today.
Oh, Chloe, it's been a joy. And again, for you and for this work, it was my joy to be able to join you and have these kinds of conversations. I do want to say to you, the work that you're doing is necessary, it is essential, and it is important. And I need you in the days when it feels like, why am I doing this? No one is listening. I need that to be the moment where you look in the mirror and say, not only am I more than enough, but the world needs this work. Period. End of statement.
I was going to say, period on the sentence so that I can go cry. Michelle Samuels Jones, you are a gem, and I really appreciate you coming on the pod.
I had a ball. It wasn't as terrifying as I thought. So thank you so, so much.
Next time on Silence is Violence, Stories of Financial Education.
We need to think about the relationship between people's individual sense that they're in control of their circumstances and they want to try to manage that for themselves and their families, with a set of institutions that are always trying to claim more and more of their time and more of their cognitive energy, especially related to finances, and how that can't help but perpetuate this cycle of feeling like you're not doing enough, even when in fact you're actually doing quite a bit more than another person similarly situated that doesn't face the financial challenges and the financial barriers that you do.
Then it becomes our challenge from an industry standpoint or otherwise to really dig deep and find out, going back to something like the ecosystem. We know that financial education by itself is not going to change everything that's needed in terms of the knowledge, the self-efficacy, the behaviors that all need to change. Although we focus a lot on the individual level, it's still a very important thing, but we don't want to be an all or nothing.
Silence is Violence, Stories of Financial Education is produced by the National Endowment for Financial Education, a 501c3 nonprofit that is the independent, centralizing voice providing leadership, research, and collaboration to advance financial education and financial well-being. The opinions and statements made on this podcast are those of the podcast participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of NEFI or constitute statements supported by NEFI. Links to our event summaries and any other documents discussed in this session are available in the show notes. For more information, visit www.nefi.org.